With the number of individuals over the age of 65 anticipated to double by the year 2050, it's important to have a deeper understanding of elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Learn more about this on the next episode of Connecting Our Community, coming up next. Hello, and welcome to Connecting Our Community. I'm Pat Shoemaker, and joining me tonight is Bob Blancato, the National Coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition. Bob Blancato is a renowned expert in the field of aging with a focus on elder abuse and exploitation. And Bob, welcome, and thank you so much for being here tonight. Describe just a little bit about Elder Justice, your coalition.
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. Elder justice is an expression that really means for older people to be free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. The federal government has really been very lax in dealing with the issue of elder abuse, even though 1 out of every 10 people over the age of 60 are victims of elder abuse. Victims of financial elder abuse lose up to $3 billion a year.
Oh my goodness.
Some of them are life savings and worse. So the coalition was formed when the Elder Justice Act was introduced about 10 years ago. And its main purpose was to give a comprehensive and coordinated federal response to elder abuse, like we do with child abuse, like we do with family violence and domestic violence, but not with elder abuse.
Well, what do you consider elder? Is there a certain age group? Is it?
Well, the legislation makes people 60 and over eligible for the services. In terms of adult protective services, which are the front lines, if you will, in the battle against elder abuse, they're really 18 and above is adult protective services. But this legislation is geared toward those 60 and above because that's where the increase is showing on a demographic basis of cases that are happening.
Well, do you think it's because there are more people in that age category, or people are reporting it more, or do you really think it's happening more than it ever did before?
Oh, I think it's a combination of them all. I mean, you know, as you point out, there's a doubling of our aging population. You know, 70% of the wealth of this country is controlled by people 50 years and over. And you have a recession, which has spiked the number of cases of elder financial abuse, because you realize that these are crimes that are committed by family members, sometimes against older people, which makes it even more difficult. But the reporting issue is important too, because you can't stop what you don't report. And the problem has been that there's been an inability of people to understand where they should be reporting elder abuse to. So
family members are exploiting their grandmothers, their mothers, their fathers, uncles, whatever. At what point is it helpful, and at what point is it exploitation? If you have an elderly aunt, mother, whoever, who you think is not capable of writing a check anymore, there's a pile of bills on the table, and you go in to help that person. Well, if that person then says, well, he took my money, he stole my money, I mean, at what point is the difference between exploitation and help?
And that's a very good question, and it's one that gets discussed quite a bit. I think the common sense answer to this is that elder abuse constitutes if an older person gives you their trust, okay, and then you violate that trust in some form or another, that is the beginning stages of elder abuse. Now, usually when you're dealing with a family member and issues around finances and so on, there should have been a conversation that took place long before that situation took place with an elder law attorney or somebody who's involved in planning, or even a social worker, or somebody that can sort of help you navigate this, because a lot of times what people are not prepared for the role of caregiving, and sometimes because they're not prepared, that can create the tension that sometimes can lead to elder abuse. And I remember when I was dealing with a situation in my own family, my mother predeceased my father, and my father, as time was going on, was getting just tired, and he'd say, "Bobby, help me out with this and that," and every time, the first time he asked me to start paying his bills, I called my lawyer, and I said, just make sure I'm doing the right thing, okay? Make sure I'm following things correctly. I said, I'm going to give you copies of everything. I need a second, logic voice here, so I'm not doing something wrong. And I can remember feeling a lot of pressure because I just want to make sure I wasn't doing anything wrong. And I think if people just take time and think about who it is that they're caring for in that situation, you can avoid that. But there's needs for better education. People really need to understand, and get trained to be a caregiver. You need to understand all the ramifications of it, which are very complicated.
And you deal with this all the time, so you knew, call a lawyer, get a second opinion. But there are so many people who either are elderly with no family close by, nobody that they can trust, and so the first maybe kind person who says, oh sure, I'll take care of you, or I'll look after your funds. Well, older people, myself included, sometimes we grew up and we thought you trust people. Right. And if somebody says, I'm going to take care of you and pay your bills, you believe them. Right. So, for somebody who doesn't have family, or somebody who perhaps doesn't have the knowledge of, gee, I better get a second opinion, I better get a lawyer in on this, I better do something. Right. How do you prevent?
There's a lot of ways that we need to improve on that. But I think what we have to do is take, for example, what an older person relies on for their sources of information now, whether it's television or it's the media. So if they are assisting in pointing out how to avoid being scammed, it's going to do a lot to prevent abuse. If they are continuing to go to their faith, to their church or the synagogue, and the people in their pastors and ministers and rabbis need to be trained, because sometimes they're the ones that can intervene in a way that could then get it reported to the proper people who can look into it. Yeah. But I think that the real issue is, to the extent that older people don't lose their capacity, because when you lose the capacity, it's a different issue. But they never would give away their Social Security number on the phone when they were in their 30s or 40s. Okay, and they were sometimes hard pressed to write checks, for different things. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, one makes it different. What is scary, though, the one statistic that I think probably gives me the creeps more than anything else, honestly, is that the average victim of elder abuse is an older woman between the age of 75 and 80 who lives alone. Mm. Census Bureau says now that 48% of all women over 75 now live alone. So where we have to concentrate our resources and our efforts, and is done through the Violence Against Women Act, is starting to address this issue as well. The Elder Justice Act will do this as well, but it's a big education campaign. And happily, Montgomery County is good at it. Montgomery County has a very strong network of aging services, ombudsman, adult protective services, the law enforcement's engaged. So here you have a model community, which is good. But a lot of places in the country that don't even have anything going on. And that's what we have to address our attention.
Yeah. So how is this funded? I mean, we need education, absolutely. It should be available everywhere, as you say, but bottom line, the economy is in a bad way and things are being cut, and this doesn't seem, unless it affects you personally, I think you might say, yeah, somebody will take care of this. It's not that big a problem. Right. Let's fund something different.
Well, when you began this program, you introduced me in my capacity as a national coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition, which means that I'm a national advocate trying to get that money. So when you asked about the money, I'm saying, welcome to my world, because now we're dealing with the problem at hand. The law was passed in 2010, the Elder Justice Act. It was authorized at almost $750,000.
Wow.
But there's two steps in the legislative process. There's authorization and appropriation, which is the money you get. We've only seen about $7 million of that so far. So here's where we think we can succeed better. Right now, everybody's trying to find value, okay? Investment, okay, versus expenditures. If a victim of elder abuse ends up in a nursing home or in a hospital, they will be taking money from Medicare and Medicaid. If you can prevent that from happening, you'll be saving those same programs money, which everybody's trying to do. But you have to invest in prevention before you see the results. This is the argument we're trying to make now.
And because that makes perfect sense, we know that it will never be approved. So.
No, I have great faith, because the new chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee is Barbara Mikulski, who is a renowned leader for years and years in the field of elder issues. I've worked with her in a number of areas, and I think amongst people in Congress, she gets it, and we look forward to working with her and trying to make that happen.
Yeah. So once the funding is there, what's the next step?
Well, the funding is directed in sort of two places primarily. One is to give a dedicated funding stream for Adult Protective Services, which is the entity that I mentioned that does the frontline work to investigate cases and prevent cases of elder abuse. Right now, they're funded under a block grant called the Social Services Block Grant, which means if a governor thinks that elder abuse is important, they'll put money in the block grant. If they don't, they won't. 13 states in this country don't give a nickel of their block grant money to adult protective services. That's wrong.
That's wrong.
Because elder abuse is going on in those states. So we're saying give them their own dedicated money that can only be used for that purpose. Because if we start doing more reporting, then there's going to be more pressure on adult protective services to do their work, and they need the resources to do it. The second thing we do is to give greater training and support for the long-term care ombudsman, the ones who investigate complaints of abuse in nursing homes, which is another issue that we have to focus on.
Right.
It's a great program, underfunded, but we can give them the resources they need with a little bit of help from this Elder Justice Act.
That is phenomenally important work. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us for the second half of Connecting Our Community.
For care as special as your child, we offer medical child care with nurses on site located in Rockville. As a program of the ARC of Montgomery County, we provide a typical child care environment, meeting the needs of medically fragile children, including daily nursing assessments, while learning through a state-approved curriculum. If you know of a child between 6 weeks and 5 years old who needs our services, contact us at the Family, Infant, and Child Care Center at 301-279-2165.
I knew I needed help paying for college. I've always wanted to be a teacher. I used to make worksheets for my friends to do. No one ever wanted to come over. My guidance counselor told me about federal student aid, and my mom helped me fill out the free application. I got the grants and loans that made school possible. There is a way to pay for school. You just have to find it. My name is Caitlin. I'm going to be a special education teacher. I'm going to live my dream.
My name is TJ.
My name's Phil.
My name is Hope.
My name is Michael.
You're watching Channel 21. Bye-bye.
Hi, and welcome back to Connecting Our Community. Our guest this evening is Bob Blancato, the National Coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition. And as we got to the break, we were talking about the more financial exploitation. We will get into the physical exploitation, but off camera, you were talking about the importance of the media. And if you could just tell everybody what we were talking about.
Sure. The reality of it is when the media discovered this issue and began to run articles, and I get a daily news feed of articles that come from all over the country about cases of elder abuse. What that does is it localizes and humanizes this issue across the country. So when we go do visits to members of Congress and senators, we bring all the information, we have the packet, we have the summary of the bill, we have data, and then we bring the news article with us. Then all of a sudden they get it. Oh, it's happening here in my community, my goodness. Now in Montgomery County, there's been a number of cases, and the Washington Post, I remember, did a very aggressive investigation into a couple of really tough financial cases involving elder abuse. But I remember a case involving a congressman's staffer's grandmother who was basically ripped off by somebody doing tree work. Okay, the proverbial person drives down the street. Oh, you know that tree's about to come down. You need my services. Well, you know, you're thinking about this and saying, this is an imminent threat. Let me sign up. Did you ask for the guy's license? Did you see the guy was even had a business? No, you were thinking in a moment of crisis. Right. And this is what we're trying to get people to think about. You know, get identification from somebody. Never give information away to somebody on the phone. Things of that nature. So it's something that happens more than we'd like to admit to. But I think because the media focuses on it, I mean, there's a classic example of this that occurred in New York, which I'll try to tell briefly. But there's a case involving a woman named Brooke Astor, who was a famous family. Right. It goes back to the 1900s. Her grandson goes to court one day and files a case against his father and his father's lawyer, charging him with, among other things, financial elder abuse of his grandmother. And I mean, that's a courageous thing to do. So in New York, the media is very competitive with one another. And the New York Times had been the paper that had covered the Astor family for years. But the New York Daily News broke the story because they had somebody down in the court looking at the cases. So I remember the next day, a reporter from the New York Times who I knew calls me up and he says, "Bob, you're still working on this issue, right?" I said, "Yeah." He says, you know about the Astor case?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "What's elder abuse?" Okay? That's the other thing we got to do. We've been educating the media for a long time too. But what the media does most effectively and what your program is doing as well, is it helps give tips to people who are watching your show, reading the paper. How do you avoid becoming a victim? What common sense things can you do? And it isn't only about the older person. You know, we all live in a community. Your show has a theme about community. We need to look out. If we have older neighbors and people in our community, we should be looking out for them. If suddenly an older person who has lived an upright life gets their utilities cut off for some reason, there's something wrong. If somebody moves into somebody's house under strange circumstances, we just can't let that happen. We have to really act as if we care. And I think this is part of what elder abuse prevention is about: caring, being alert, and being aware, because it could be your grandmother or your mother, and you don't want to be in that situation.
But I think so many people sometimes in this area, especially a lot of transients, you're here and then you move, or you're new to the community or whatever. You may see something that you think, that doesn't look quite right, but you don't want to butt in. You don't want to be the one who calls the long-term protective services or, the police and say, I think there's something going on, because then you have to live next to that person, and if it turns out there isn't something, or the family says, well, how dare you? I think people sometimes just don't want to do that because they don't want to be the one.
Well, there's a lot of times people can do these things in an anonymous way, if their intentions are good. Sometimes these cases that go before the long-term care ombudsman, the person never identifies themselves but gives all the details that are necessary for somebody to investigate the case. So there are these cases, and all the things are different. But I think fundamentally, we all know right from wrong. We know when something's not right.
Yeah.
And and if you get criticized for stepping in and trying to help an older person not be a victim of elder abuse, that's a criticism I'm willing to take.
Yeah.
And I think the people who you report it to would appreciate it, and they'll look into it and they'll see. So it's a very slippery slope sometimes.
Yeah, and moving into the physical, we've talked about the exploitation of money. The physical is, or the mental as well,
there's
I
a
think.
Whole series. There's physical abuse, which is pretty much as described, where people are beaten and otherwise manhandled by either in their homes or in a nursing home, But the problem here is that what we've learned in our work is that when an older person shows up in an emergency room with a bruise, there's too much emphasis on the fact that they might have had a fall, and there isn't enough effort being checked to make sure that's not a victim of physical abuse.
Right.
So now in the Elder Justice Act, we're asking for funds to do forensic centers, so that like we do with child abuse, when you can tell a case of child abuse, we need to do the same kind of research and activity for older people, so that emergency workers can understand the situation, detect it, and report it. Then you have neglect, which is where somebody just basically who you're in someone's care and they choose not to provide that care, which happens a lot. And then the worst form of elder abuse in terms of its being so hidden is the fastest growing form of elder abuse, which is self-neglect. You're abandoned by somebody, you're left on your own, you have no capacity to understand what you should be doing to feed yourself, to care for yourself, and you become a victim of self-neglect. And that's the hardest thing to stop, because you're at the end stage of the process. And that's why the research and the activities at the local and state levels now are being focused on trying to identify where the older people who live alone with no support are, because there's a chance that they could be in need of assistance, and if you get to it early, you might prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Well, and I think self-neglect could possibly be depression, mental capacities. So are you working with mental health counselors and people like that?
Mental health counselors. See, the best way communities address this issue, and Montgomery County's done this, is they form multidisciplinary teams. They bring law enforcement in, they bring the mental health people in, the social service people, the faith-based community, and healthcare workers, social workers, everybody that has a role, has an understanding of this issue, and they work together in a team to address it in their community. They do forums, they do public education activities, they're dispatched to homes on occasion, things of that nature. And that's really what makes the difference, because if everybody's understanding what the issue is and working together, there isn't going to be this confusion. What do we do? What's going on here? Who do we talk to? So, but mental health is a very serious issue in older people, and dementia, the victims of elder abuse who are having dementia and Alzheimer's is growing, and as the whole panoply of Alzheimer's is growing. So we need to be investing a lot, not only in the research, but in the area of services to make sure that, you know, whoever needs it can get it. And, you know, we all have to prioritize to some degree. You know, the vulnerable older person needs to be given greater respect and regard in terms of how we use our service dollars.
And so if we suspect that something is happening, if you have a neighbor, if you have a relative, what is the first step?
Well, you can either call the Montgomery County Office on Aging as a place to start. The local Adult Protective Service unit in Montgomery County should be getting a phone call. But usually the aging programs are the ones, they coordinate very well, the Montgomery County Office on Aging. I would start there, but, you know, but people even have to understand where they exist. You know, people don't always know where these offices are.
Right.
You know, they should be on the wall, there should be some kind of a listing that's easy for people to find if they have a question. Because that's where most of the reports are done, through the existing channels of social service agencies.
And in terms of funding, is Montgomery County on the top of the list? I mean, if things are being prioritized?
Well, the Older Americans Act is the primary source of funding for the Montgomery County Office on Aging and its services. Unfortunately, that funding has been sort of frozen. You know, it hasn't grown at the rate that the need is there. But again, advocacy is beginning to shape the message that you're really not talking about an expenditure of dollars, which people have problems with. You're talking about an investment that brings you a return in terms of savings and other programs. So, you know, the Area Agency Network is a very strong one. They work hard in all the communities where they exist. And Montgomery County has been very good over the years. I've worked up here with folks for many years up here.
And so what can people do to spread the word, fight with their congresspeople to get funding? I mean, what can the average person, so to speak, do?
The average person, and again, you happen to have a progressive congressional delegation in Maryland, and Chris Van Hollen in particular is a very strong leader, you know, but they still need to hear a very simple message: fund the Elder Justice Act. That's all they have to say. Email, one sentence, one phone call, you know, go visit their local office and say, fund the Elder Justice Act, stop elder abuse. And, you know, it's not rocket science, it's simple, it sticks, and it's all about messaging.
And there you go. And on that note, we will close our show. Bob, I'd like to thank you. It's been fascinating. It really has been wonderful, eye-opening, I hope, to people out in the audience. For more information, you can visit their website, elderjusticecoalition.com. You can, if someone that you know is in immediate danger, you should definitely call 911. To contact the Montgomery County Police Family Crimes Elder Abuse Unit, you can call 240-773-5400. You can call the Adult Protective Services 24 hours a day at 240-777-3000. For someone who needs help in a long-term care facility, you can contact the Montgomery County Long-Term Care Ombudsman at 240-777-3369. You can also go to the Connecting Our Community blog on the mymcmedia.org website. So again, thank you, Bob. It's been fascinating, as I say, I hope eye-opening. Let's bring some information about this problem. Thank you to everyone for watching tonight. Please be sure to join us on the next Connecting Our Community, and you can email any comments to connectingourcommunity@gmail.com. And we do hope that you take the time to take this to heart and join us next time on Connecting Our Community. Thank you.